We start off with the vision there of the 24-hour economy, what the president said the 24-hour economy is. And he talks about it in two forms. So he says the 24-hour economy is both a destination and a journey. So in terms of it being a destination, we want to get to a place where the Ghanaian economy is so productive and so efficient that the 24-hour economy is not enough to completely utilize all our resources and our the assets that we have, and that we need to run shifts to fully leverage the resources we have. But there's a journey to get there, and part of what I'm going to talk to you about today is the journey. How do we get to that economy that is utilizing every single hour of the day and the night and being productive and churning out jobs and prosperity for its people? Oftentimes, when we're talking about the 24-hour economy, we tend to make the development case first. Why do we need a 24-hour economy? So I'll talk about the development case, but I'll also talk about what the investment case for the 24-hour economy is. Now, for the development case, the thing that you realize when you look at the Ghanaian economy is that it hasn't changed much from the kind of economy that was built since colonial days. We largely export raw commodities. So in 2025, 86% of our exports were cocoa, gold, and oil. Okay, it's no different from what you would have found in the 20s. In the 20s, the only difference is you wouldn't have had the oil. You wouldn't have had oil, you would have had timber. Okay, that's really the difference. And then we import everything else. Okay. The import is not actually, a problem. It's good to import, right? But sometimes also what you are importing. If you disaggregate the kind of imports that we do in Ghana, you realize a majority of what we import, we just import to consume. These are things we can produce in Ghana, but we import to consume. Oftentimes economists will tell you that the reason why we talk about exports, and exports is so important, is so that you can generate the foreign exchange that you need to import the machinery and the intermediate goods that you don't have to drive your economy. In our case, even when we are bringing in the foreign exchange, what we use it to do is to import, the watches, the yamuadie, the poultry, the things that we'll eat, and the second-hand cars that we are going to drive. That's what we largely do. If you look at the 10 top imports in Ghana, number one is oil, and mostly the oil that we are importing, most of it go into fueling our vehicles and transporting us around. Then you have things like second-hand cars. Then you have offals and poultry. You have cereals. Those are the things that are in the top 10 imports in Ghana. So our economy is deformed, and that deformity, you see it in the kind of things that we export and the kind of things that we import. The results of this deformity really is the fact that the economy is not necessarily translating growth into jobs and opportunities for its people. Because if you are so import dependent on everything that you use, what essentially you end up doing is you end up exporting your jobs. So we took a look at the employment elasticity of output of Ghana over time. And what you realize that it continues going down. So the employment elasticity of output looks at how much is your growth translating into job creation. And as of 2024, it was at about 0.29, which means for every 10% growth that we're getting, we're only seeing about 2.9% growth in our employment rate, which is extremely low. In the 90s, we were at about 0.7. Now, the thing that you also realize is that, whilst our economy is so import dependent and is not necessarily creating opportunities for its people, we are also not necessarily investing in the future in a way that allows us to be able to open up that economy so that in future we can say we have hope that 10 years, 20 years from now, things are going to be different. And you see that, for instance, in the gross fixed capital formation. So The Spence Commission, which is a commission that is a commission on growth and development, that looked at what are the things that correlate to long-term growth, and how do countries position themselves for long-term growth. Essentially realized that the biggest correlation for long-term growth is how much you are investing into the productive assets. So your gross fixed capital formation. Actually, the correlation is stronger for your net fixed capital formation because gross is looking at it without depreciation. The net fixed capital formation also looks at the depreciation. If you look at Ghana, we are at about 10% on average. The minimum that they saw as correlating to long-term growth was about 25%. The only time Ghana crossed 25% was in 2023 after HIPC. So once we had the HIPC, 2003. Sorry, not 2020, 2003. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday. So one, we are not investing very much into the future. And part of it is also because government finances itself is also structurally constrained. Because people say, why doesn't government do this? Why doesn't government do that? Right? But if you take a look at the government budget, and the graph in here, you might not see it very well, but there's a line here that shows our tax revenue. And the lower half here looks at wages, and the upper half is the how much we spend on interest payments. So you realize that on average, we are actually spending almost all the money that we are making as a government on paying salaries and paying interest rates. That's essentially what the government finances looks like. So you don't have a lot left for us to invest in that capital equipment and in the infrastructure that we need. And sometimes I say the thing also is, investing in infrastructure doesn't yield quick returns. And in an environment where you need to win an election every 4 years, if you're a government, you focus on the consumption goods that give you quick returns and that people will vote for, than the long-term, capital investment that takes years to materialize. So we have a structure that actually doesn't allow us to also invest into our future. So what the 24-hour economy seeks to do is to try to change that around so that our economy can become a lot more productive and start translating the growth that we get into in the economy into jobs, opportunities, and prosperity for its people. We try to do that by first understanding what are the big constraints to growth. What are the things that's preventing that's the type of growth that we want to see, the inclusive and growth that translates into jobs from happening. And then figure out how do we overcome them in the face of the fiscal constraints that we have. Okay. So we've identified a couple of constraints, and the delivery model, or the way that we propose to tackle them is first for government to play that coordinating role and de-risk, investment into these places, and structure, the interventions as projects that private capital can actually see the profitability and be able to put their money in there. And then if we do that, what we do is we are actually then genuinely encouraging private capital to participate in our growth, to put their capital at risk and be able to contribute to our development. Oftentimes you hear people say private sector led. And if you look at what we often mean when we say private sector led, what we often mean is that government will identify the opportunities, then government will create contracts, and government will invite private sector people to bid for the contract, and then government will pay for the contract. That's not private sector led. That's still government led, government making the payment and government bearing the investment risk. We are turning it around and saying, okay, we identify the opportunities with you, the private sector. We design the investment. We identify the things that make it difficult for you to be profitable. If we need to provide what we call viability gap financing, we provide the viability gap financing, but then private capital puts their own money at risk in the projects and actually execute them. That way, you're sure that the investment decisions are actually decisions that are optimal and not decisions that are driven by other interests. So that's really our development case. But the thing is, I mean, as an investor, you ask yourself, why should I care? Okay, why do I care about this? Why you should care about this is because there is a huge demand that if you participate in this thing that we are creating, you'll be able to take advantage of. Ghana is about 34 million people. We import 38.9 billion cedis of food every year. Actually, on average, about $3 billion of food every year that we import. If you look at West Africa, the data from the World Bank says 23 to 25 billion dollars, but there are some estimates that actually put food imports at about $40 billion in West Africa. Africa is about $90 billion of food, and this is just talking about food alone, right? Not to talk about all the other consumer goods and all the other things that we could make out of here. Africa is 1.4 billion consumers. So this is a market that you can target, and this is demand that actually exists today. It's not demand that you need to create. The problem is the demand today is being served by imports. And it's being served by imports because we are not competitive. Our economies do not produce at the same competitive rates that others are producing in other places. And so when our goods get to the market, they are not able to compete and they always lose out. And some of the things, you look at energy, for instance. When you look at energy, today industry is actually getting energy at an average of 23 cents per kilowatt hour. That, if you compare to other places that are getting, the benchmark is around 7 cents per kilowatt hour. Okay. You are not going to be profitable at 23 cents per kilowatt hour. You look at agric, and almost every single place, the yields that we are getting per hectare doesn't, allow us to compete. You take tomatoes. So we're looking at the tomato value chain. And in the tomato value chain, even in commercial agriculture, Ghana is yielding about 15 tons per hectare. If you go to Netherlands, just take a wild guess how much Netherlands is yielding per hectare. I haven't checked Germany. I should have checked Germany. But Netherlands is yielding about 500 tons. We're yielding 15 tons. There is no way you'll be able to compete. Right? You take a look at, so I have here maize. We are doing about 2 tons per hectare. There are places that are doing about 5 to 7 tons per hectare. Cassava, we are one of the largest producers of cassava, but we produce it at very inefficient rates. We are doing cassava at about 5-6 tons per hectare, when others are doing at about 20 tons per hectare. So we won't be able to compete at these levels. Then you take logistics also. Logistics is a big issue. So in terms of logistics, the data actually shows that about 60% of the cost of goods in Ghana, you can attribute it to the logistics costs, the supply chain. And the global average is about 15%. So by the time you move your products first you are producing at very inefficient rates, but by the time you also even get it to market, you've added so much cost that you are not competitive. There are several other, Hillary is looking at me, I'm sure he's thinking of my time, so I'll move very quickly. But there are several things that make us uncompetitive that today makes it unprofitable for you to want to produce over here, right? And that's why you have situations where industry is operating at about 40% of its capacity, 40% capacity utilization. Because the market is not there, you can't compete in the market. The inputs that you need, you are not getting the input. And even in places where we've managed to increase production, sometimes we are not able to get to market. Typical example, you look at the maize value chain. As of, well, I last looked at it in October. I understand the prices are lower, but maize per ton in the market in Ghana was about 10,000 cedis in October. At the farm gate, it was about 4,000 cedis, but the farmers couldn't sell. They couldn't get the 4,000 cedis to market to sell. I actually understand today it's close to 1,000 cedis, but they still have, some people have, how do you call it, harvest from 2 seasons ago that they are not able to sell. Okay. So you have the inefficiencies that allow us, that make it impossible for us to compete. This is also one of those things that I think is important for us to see. So this is looking at the credit to private sector as a percentage of GDP. And you see Ghana has consistently been below 10%. That's Ghana here, the blue line. You know, we are sometimes close to zero. So what our banks do, and one of my senior banker friends is here. When I came in, I saw him. The banks give all their money to the government, and they don't give it to businesses, for businesses to actually do business. You look at China up there, you know, banks give more than 100% of their GDP to the private sector. You look at Vietnam. Vietnam is about 120%. We are consistently below 10%. Why? Because of those structural deformities. Okay. And those are the things that we need to change. And that's what the 24-hour economy is designed to change. So what the 24-hour economy does here is we are putting in place the structures that allow us to tackle all of these inefficiencies and all of these constraints so that private capital can be profitable, investments can be profitable, and then people can participate. So what are some of the things that we are doing? So if you take a look at the 24H Plus platform, we have the integrated value chains. One of the things that we did from the very beginning was the realization that, look, there's so much that you can do, but you can't do everything. So you need to focus. And so we identified value chains that have a higher impact on the development that we want to see. So we looked at the import bill, we looked at impact on inflation, we looked at impact on other value chains and general demand, and selected these value chains. So those are the value chains that we are focused on. And the thing with the value chains that we've also selected is that we realize oftentimes interventions in Ghana have been fragmented. So we focus on a small part of the value chain and not the entire value chain. So for instance, the glut in maize that we often see is because we focus on helping farmers to increase yields with, improved seeds and all of that, and did not think about how do they get these yields to market. Right. So you have a situation, you've helped the farmer to increase yields, but because you've helped him to increase yields, he's not getting access to market. His goods doesn't get sold, he makes a loss, and next season he's not going to farm. So you actually make it worse for him. So in tackling those value chains, you need to adopt a fully integrated value chain approach. So we've identified some priority value chains, and we are structuring interventions along the whole value chain. So we have a framework that we call policy production offtake. So for every value chain and every project that we are looking at, we look at what's the policy environment that you need for this to succeed. Then what are the production nodes within that value chain, and how does offtake happen? So that you coordinate all of this and ensure that when people are making investments in there, they go in there and they know that the policy environment is right, and when I produce, I'm going to be able to get offtake. And we've structured all of this as projects. And what we are doing currently is we are preparing a lot of these projects. Because when you go out looking for funding and financing, what everybody asks you is, where's your project? And I remember at the early stages of designing this, we met a lot of DFIs. And one DFI was telling us, like, Ghana never makes full use of its headroom. And the reason why Ghana never makes full use of its headroom is because you never have projects. And then when you meet the Ghanaians, they can really talk. They will make you believe. And so you decide, I'm going to do everything with you. You have conversations until you send that email that asks for, send me the concept notes. And then everything goes quiet. Why? Because we don't have projects. So we resolved in the very beginning that we are going to ensure that there's a strong pipeline of projects that are aligned to government priorities and that also provide opportunity for private sector and for people to invest in. And so the project preparation is one of those things that we are doing currently. We're working very closely with the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund. They are our infrastructure partner. We have a project preparation funding that we've put together, and we are looking for additional project preparation funding to prepare projects and make them ready for investment. I've talked about the policy interventions. Now, the SPVs, the way we are then tackling these projects is, rather than have a situation where, what most people are used to, which is government then puts out a tender and says, I'm looking for somebody to build this, and government will pay. We are structuring up the execution of the project as SPVs. So we work with GIF or whoever the private partner is to structure an SPV that would execute that project. That SPV will get all the incentives, all the things that it requires to be successful. But the SPV will be financed largely by the private sector participants. So every project that we have will have a co-development partner. And that co-development partner is a private sector participant that actually takes up the project and runs with the project. So if you do that, what you have is government itself is not the one putting up money. And so if a private sector person is putting up money, you're sure that the decision making is going to be the right decision making. You won't have a situation, and this, I was going around the country a few weeks back, and you'll be amazed at the number of capital projects that we've put up in this country that are not working. You go to Bontanga, there's a rice mill there with everything that was put up 3 years ago. It's never been operated. You see park houses that have been built and that have never been used. You won't have a private sector person putting their money in that. But of course, if you put out a tender and say, I want somebody to build a park house for me in the middle of the bush, you have enough people bidding to come and build it for you, because at the end of the day, you pay them, they don't bear the risk of the investment. So that's the way we are structuring this. And part of the constraints that we also came across was the issue of land and infrastructure. Because businesses will tell you that when you're coming to invest in a place like Ghana, you don't only need to think about your business, your core business. You also need to think about, where am I getting the roads from? Where is the transformer going to come from? My drainage. Every single thing you need to think about. And it significantly increases your cost of doing business. So we've structured a lot of the projects around industrial parks and agroecological parks. The industrial parks basically provides the shared infrastructure so that when businesses come, they have that infrastructure and they just focus on how to basically do their business. And when you look at the agroecological park, it's also putting in place the infrastructure. And one of the key infrastructure with the agroecological parks is actually the irrigation systems. So we realize that part of the reason why yields are so low is because we depend on rain-fed agriculture. And less than 5% of our cultivated land is actually irrigated. But you start looking into how are we financing irrigation? And what quickly comes across is, today we spend about 12,000 cedis per hectare, $12,000, not cedis, $12,000 per hectare on irrigation. We've managed to actually run trials that today is producing the irrigation at $1,500 per hectare. So cut it down from $12,000 to $1,500. Okay. Now, if you're doing irrigation at $12,000 per hectare, it's not profitable. Nobody's going to put their money in there. But if you can bring it down to a place where it actually starts to make sense, you're going to see the amount of irrigated agriculture going up. So we're doing all of this so that as a private sector participant, you can take one of our projects and know that you have a government body that's going to support you, that's going to ensure that has prepared the project, ensure that it is de-risked, and that you are likely to be a lot more profitable. And most private sector people who are really serious about doing business will tell you that's what they want. Just government gets out of our way, ensure that we can be profitable, ensure that the systems work, and we'll bring our money and be able to do business. If we do this, it helps the country and it helps the private sector people. So some of what has happened so far. So we have the law, it's 1164. Sorry, I should have changed it. So the 24-hour economy at 1164 has been passed. We are actually speaking to investors who are committing up to $11.5 billion in different projects. The way we work, and this is the model that is when you see a project that you are interested in, we begin to engage you through an MOU. Now, we all know MOUs are not binding, but it gives us a framework to start, working. And once we prepare the project to a reasonable level, then we sign a joint development agreement. The joint development agreement is a lot more binding, because that one, you're making commitments on what you are going to, And then we form a joint coordinating committee and work with you to now bring the project on stream. We've signed 5 joint development agreements, which amount to about $6 billion USD. So commitments of about $6 billion, which are actually binding commitments that investors have made to actually invest here. When Madam from GIPs was talking, she said you need to register. So we've registered all of them with GIPC. I'm sure you are. So all of the 6 JDAs we've registered with the GIPC. The companies are actually here. They've set up. They've sent in their first sets of investments, and we've started with the project development process. Then, when it comes to land, so land is a big issue. Beyond the fact that getting large tracts of land is difficult, you need to deal with several families. You also have a situation where traditionally, the way people get access to land is we go to the allodial landowners and get the rights to the land. Oftentimes, we forget that the structure of land ownership in Ghana is very complicated, because oftentimes you have people who are on the land, the usufructs, they don't actually hold title to the land, but they are interest holders in the land. And whenever you see communities agitating against projects and all of that, you dig in and you often see that it's a lot of these people that haven't been involved in the project. So you go, the chief signs the land out for you, but the community is not happy. And every time you're having all these problems. So we have a model we call the participatory land access model. I won't talk too much about it, but essentially the idea here is we get into the community, we get the land, we involve everybody, we sign an FPIC with them, and then they then form a community land trust and take equity positions in the project. To date, right now it's actually close to 600,000 hectares that we are engaging under this FPIC, the PLAM model to acquire the land. So there's also land for people who are interested in getting land to do this. A lot of what we are doing is in what we call the Volta Economic Corridor. Now, some of the specific projects, and I'll run through these projects very quickly, right? The first one we started with was energy. Why? Because we believe energy is the foundation to industrialization. If you don't have reliable, cheap energy, you are not going to be able to industrialize. So we have this Bupe Solar and BESS project. This we actually have signed a JDA with the investor that is going to be our co-developer for this. And the target for us is to be able to produce power at between 6 and 9 cents per kilowatt hour. So down from the 23 cents per kilowatt hour. That's the target for this project. The land is in Bupe right now. It's one of the lands that we got under the PLAM process, and development is actually now going. It's being executed in 3 phases. phase 1, megawatts. Phase 2 is 500 megawatts, which will come on stream in 2028, April. And phase 3 will come on stream in 2028, December, which is 900 megawatts. This is the best to support it. So power is the first thing. And when it comes to power, there's also a third project, which I haven't put in here, which is a compressed biogas project. We all know about gas and how important gas is for industrialization. But there are a lot of stranded industries that don't get access to gas. So we are cultivating Napier grass in Kabonwule and in Bupe, and using that Napier grass to create compressed biogas, so that you compress it, you liquefy it, and then you can transport it to industries. Then the next stage for us is about transportation, because we've all talked about how we talked about how the logistics chain actually contributes so much to cost. And if you look at Ghana, a lot of our movement, a lot of our transportation is focused on road. But road is the most inefficient mode of transport. Now, what we are doing is leveraging the Volta Lake. Why? Because you have a big lake, you have a lot of land around the lake, but you don't have a lot of development around there, because people tell you that it's difficult to invest in that area because you don't have the infrastructure. If you're going to invest there, you need to have the roads. The roads are not there. The roads are traditionally on the other side of Ghana, and that's also, something from our colonial heritage, which we'll talk about later. But so our objective is enable reliable transportation on the lake. And if you enable reliable transportation on the lake, you open up the lake for, you open up the area around the lake for commercial activity. So there are 3 projects that we're actually designing over there. There's the Volta Lake Transport System. So this basically looks at enabling ports in the south and ports in the north. So we are looking at Mpakadan in the south and Bupe in the north. And then enabling it so that you can have transportation up and north. The up and down. The business case already exists for this. You don't need to, create a new business case for this. You have the fuel that is moving up. You have the food that's coming down. You have the rail that is now at Mpakadan, and GRDA actually did a pilot run of the train carrying containers a few days ago. So you have everything that exists, to be able to actually run this spine. All you need now is to ensure that the ports are there and they are functional. And Cabinet has actually approved that 24-hour economy takes the concessions for developing the lake from VRA, which is we're in the process of doing, and then we'll be able to develop this water lake transport system. I'm moving quick because I don't want Hillary to sack me. Pardon? You've already sacked me. So I'll just tell you about I just mentioned the projects, some of the projects So there's a Tamale Air Cargo Hub, which is basically building an export and import terminal at the Tamale Airport. The Tamale Airport is actually, it has the longest runway in Ghana today. It's about 3.9 kilometers, longer than the Accra International Airport. And it's also the closest airport to Europe and North Africa and the Gulf, right? So the thing is, we are developing a number of projects within that area, and we want the Tamale Airport to be the center for export. Actually, if you look at the data, a lot of the exports that we are getting from Ghana, about 40% export through air transport. About 40% actually comes from the north, so the northern part of Ghana. So this provides a strong business case for an air cargo hub in the north. There's a terminal in Yape. There's a Legon Pharmaceutical Innovation Park that we are doing in Esichari, and that's a 2,000 acre park to provide, an enclave for pharmaceutical companies to be able to come and manufacture a lot of the drugs. Today we import up to 70% of our pharmaceutical needs. And if you think about even the raw materials we use, that figure is even higher. So the Legon Pharmaceutical Park, this we've done the pre-feasibility study. It was actually very positive. We're actually in the process of doing a feasibility study. There are a number of park developers we are engaging to be able to move this forward. There are a number of agro parks. So there's a poultry program that we are doing right now. I'll just go through. So there's Volobato. Volobato is focused on sugarcane, rice, and maize. It's an agro park. There is the Singa Vegetable and Cut Flower Corridor, which is between Savannah and Northern Region, just by the White Volta. There is the Kwahu Afram Plains Parks that focuses on tomatoes, cassava, and sweet potatoes and potatoes. There's the Ogwa Tech Park at UCC, which is essentially a BPO park that we are doing. And there are also other financial projects that we are doing. So in all today, we have about, don't worry, I'm about to end. We have about 18 projects that we are actively developing. And there's more than 60 projects, concept notes that are in the pipeline. And so if you are interested in any of these projects, there are different ways to get involved. You can get involved as a co-developer. So coming in at the point where we are building the infrastructure and helping to develop the parks and all of that. Or you can come in as an investor. If you come in as an investor, what you do is you basically come in, take a position in some of these parks and be able to produce. We are finalizing the incentives, the 24-hour economy incentives with the Ministry of Finance. We need to work it out for it to go to Parliament and all. But what we are proposing is very simplified, and it covers accelerated depreciation, it covers duty and VAT on imported equipment and intermediate goods, and then CIT. Those are the three areas that the 24-hour economy incentives cover. Hopefully by the end of this year, that would be done. And I'll end by just saying that what we are looking to do is to do a transformation program, right? And we say the greatest returns in an economic transformation will go to those who help build a system that make the markets possible, and not those who arrive once the markets have matured. Oftentimes, when you talk to people, everybody wants to see that it is done before they come. We are inviting the people who can see what we are doing, trust in the structuring, and be able to support us to actually make it real, because the opportunity is real. And what we are then offering you is a first mover advantage in this market that has been so inefficient for so long, and that we are looking to transform once and for all. Thank you so much.